All right. Well, welcome to the online network of independent learning professionals. I am Patty Bryant, and we are having a special community hour today. Today, we are, by popular demand, going to dive into something that we've all had to do, which is project estimates. And I guess you may not have had to do them if you only do hourly, but even then, sometimes clients still ask, like how many hours do you think it's going to take? And it also brings up a really good point of if you're currently charging hourly rates, you might consider going to project-based pricing if that's something that you feel like would be beneficial for you. That is how I squirreled away lots and lots of money because project-based estimates, you get penalized if you're the faster you are, the more you get penalized when you work hourly. So it's a good goal to have to go the project estimate route if it makes sense, if you can scope the project clearly and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of want this to be a discussion, but to start off, we're not going to just jump straight to numbers. I think the big thing about estimating projects are the questions you ask. I think that is where we get into trouble, not asking the right questions. So the scenario for today is going to be that, and let me just stop sharing this so I can get a good look at you. So the scenario is going to be that Speedy Burrito's team has noticed some serious inconsistency. So their inventory is off. Coupons are not being applied correctly. They're losing cash at the register, and they've asked you to create training to solve it. You've not met with them yet. You just kind of had an introductory email, and you know that the learning objectives, they've went that far. They've scoped out the learning objectives. I'm going to put all this on my screen in a minute, but they need people to be able to ring up sales properly, apply discounts correctly, and handle cash accurately. And that is all we've got so far. So the way I think that we should go forward with this is let's take just a couple of minutes. I want to give folks a chance to spend a couple of minutes in silence if you want to write down a few questions that you can think of. And also, if you've got, like a Word document or something where you've used, for questions, I'm going to bring up this whiteboard here. Can you see this whiteboard on your screen with the scenario? Okay, perfect. Thank you, Brenda. So let's just take a couple of minutes. We're going to write down questions that we can think of right now. And then what I think we'll do is folks can, once we've taken a couple of minutes, folks can shout them out. I'll put them on in the appropriate columns here. And then we can just have conversations as we go through. So we don't have to be super formal about this. So any questions before we let's just take 1 minute and write down a few questions. Any questions before we take a second here? All right, I don't see anyone asking a question. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start the timer. If you need a minute to grab anything, your questions from a Word document, write out some stuff, do it, and we'll be back in just 1 minute. All right, that was a minute. Ooh, minutes go by fast. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and just get started here. And this is, this is a question storm. It's not a pop quiz, so you don't need to solve anything. What we're going to do is just throw out the things that you want to know, so you're not walking into, an unknown abyss when you're trying to scope this project. So you can either put your question on the whiteboard in the area that it, like questions about the project, questions about stakeholders or SMEs, and then questions about the timeline budget. You can either put it on, or you can click raise hand and tell me your question. I'll put it on for you. Or you can just unmute and just, say whatever your question is. And I want this to be a little bit of a discussion, so it doesn't have to be just like questions. It's like if somebody puts a question in and you have a question about that, let's talk about it. So because the whole goal of this is to just get better at estimating projects. And so that's the whole goal. All right, what do we got? In the ecosystem, what are the optimal training modalities? Love it. Which metrics are you trying to change? That's always a great one. Like, what's the business needle that we're trying to move here? What training tools do you own? Yeah, like if they are wanting, storyline, if we're going to do something in storyline and they're wanting, to be able to edit it later, what are staff currently doing when they're ringing up the sales? That's a huge one. What else? And feel free to unmute and shout some out as well. And the crowd goes wild.
I'll add one. What is the time frame if they have a specific deadline that they need to roll this out?
Oh, that's a really good one. Time frame, 100%. What is the time frame? Perfect, Sarah. And as we go through here, I will also I'm going to do a little bit of a add some curveballs in once we see what some of the questions are, as clients do.
I can't figure out how to write on this thing, but
you have to hit the T for text on the left, or sticky notes. Some people found the sticky notes, which took me a long time at one point.
I can't get off the pen. That's fine. But I think what solutions have already is similar to, do you have system applications? Do you have the functions written down anywhere, and what format? And then I think that's probably pretty similar, but
oh yeah,
about cashier training, sometimes the vendor provides it, sometimes they have nothing.
Exactly. Yeah, do you have the procedures written down anywhere? Or is it going to be a bunch of SME meetings getting it out of their head?
Yeah.
I'm just going to read out some of them that we've got in here. We've got a lot of really great questions. So do you have any existing process documentations? Do you have preferred training modality? What solutions have you already tried? Which metrics are you trying to change? When did this problem start happening? Did something change to trigger it? That's a really good one. Will these be on demand, instructor-led? Will it be a conversion from a prior approach? Yeah, like were they teaching this, in the classroom before and now it's going to be online? Have you asked staff for feedback on where they're getting stuck? Yeah, what are the key who are the key stakeholders and their roles? What's the average sale amount the staff are asked to ring up? Why are coupons so difficult? Yeah, like, is this a system problem or is this a training problem? That's always a good question. Why is the behavior wrong and how did they come to that conclusion? Yeah. When do you want to get started? Who can review the training materials? Do you have a budget set aside? Yeah. Who's going to review the training materials once they're published? Look at us. Holy moly. We'll definitely save this whiteboard as well. Are there multiple locations of this restaurant? Are all the problems the same? All location, that's a really great one. Yeah. And by the way, this is actually modeled after when I worked at Chipotle. This was literally a legit problem that we had there. And we found this problem by going to we were running reports and noticing that like the inventory was super skewed. So like, for example, when when you're ordering like barbacoa and chicken and whatever, all that stuff for the burritos and things, it was super skewed. And then what we found out was, that like I literally went to the top performing Chipotle, which also had, some difficulty in this. And I, literally worked the cash register and then worked the roll next to it just so I could see what was happening. And it's like they're just sliding stuff across, just being like chicken burrito, chicken burrito. And it's like, that's barbacoa. What is happening over here? Because they were trying to get people out the door because they were like trying to rush. So that was an interesting one. All right, let's see what else. If anybody has any others they want to shout out, let me know. Who makes their training? Have they worked with a contractor? That's a really good one to set, like, understanding of how much you have to educate in the beginning. I love that. Have your staff ask for feedback? Yeah, that one we did. Do you have budgets? Yeah, that's a really big one. Budget set aside.
Is there something on there for how many rounds of?
No, I haven't seen that. That's a really good one. I'm gonna add it. Discuss how many rounds of revisions. Any other ones? How expensive is this problem? That's a really good one. And in the situation that I was in, it was really expensive because now you don't have enough, barbecue. Your stuff is all off.
Yeah, do they have a history report of errors? Is that documented anywhere?
That's a really good one. Are reports of errors documented anywhere? Oh, wow. Do it like that. You can tell how much I use this whiteboard. I'm like, wow, this is something different. Okay.
I would add, especially for the bring up sales properly, if this is like a computer-based system, is there existing training from the manufacturer and have they used that?
On ringing up cells. Yeah. Is there existing training for the manufacturer on ringing up sales?
Yeah, not necessarily to cut myself out of getting the job, but saying like I can adapt that to
Yeah.
specifically your company.
Yeah, 100%.
Incorporate it.
Exactly. And I think that that's really important because it kind of goes in with, Dawn's point earlier of like, when we're looking at scoping something, we want to know, like, does this content exist anywhere? And if it does, what is the quality of it? Like, sometimes, the content exists nowhere and you have to have SME meetings. So that's going to, be, you're going to have to scope way more hours for that because now you got SME meetings and, you're going to have to, be able to distill the information, ask the right questions, all that kind of stuff. Or maybe someone has created a little bit of training, but it's not great. Or are you getting it from the manufacturer and it's accurate? It just needs to, be, finessed and maybe a more easy to understand way. Really good point. Yeah, this is a really good one too. How many hours in a week can you spend reviewing the materials? Because that is going to be able to tell you about timeline and stuff like that. Yeah. Yeah, what's your training environment, LMS, LRS? And, along with that one, I would even see something like, like, are you going to need help putting it on, the LMS? Do you have an LMS team? Because a lot of times they want, additional level of support, not just to create the training, but also to, to implement it and even test it, all of the things. No. Yeah, this is a good one to jump into, right, Mark, for sure. Um, all right. I feel like we've got some really good questions here. Feel free to keep, adding questions as we kind of move into discussion. I would love to hear from folks on, are there any questions on here that, that you hadn't considered before, or, one that, any question that you want to discuss or talk about a little bit more. And you can just unmute, or you can hit raise hand, or usually I say you can do this at your camera, but I can't see everyone because we're looking at a whiteboard. And I'll save this, like I said. This is being recorded, and I'll also save it, the whiteboard itself, so we have it.
I would say I've never considered asking how expensive the problem is. I think that's a really great question. It's something I feel like they probably wouldn't have the answer to, but would get them really thinking about the ROI of the training, which could be great for when you present the proposal budget.
Yeah. Yeah, because then you're able to, position it. We had someone come on at one point and walk us through, what was that called, you all, whoever might remember. It was like value-based positioning, value-based pricing. Like, your problem is worth $1 million and we're only going to charge 100 grand. Look how, like that kind of thing. Because it's based on the value of what they're going to be getting.
That's a really good point, is that you ask those type of questions because you are trying to calculate it even if they're not,
Yep.
because you want to say that. But also, to me, part of landing clients is asking good questions, because in this part of the process, they haven't hired you. So they may be deciding between you and other IDs or other companies.
Mhm.
And if you ask really good questions that makes them think, then they may be more likely to hire you, because one, it shows you know what you're doing, and it's not, I've told a lot of new people who want to start, freelancing this, they'll come in and they just want to ask about e-learning, but they're not asking those strategic questions. So that shows I'm not here to make you an e-learning, get paid and run off. I'm thinking about your business goals. I'm thinking about strategy, ROI, what's the other one? KPIs, all those type of things.
Mm-hmm. 100%. Yeah. That's a really good point, Kim. And Christy, another good point, it establishes you as someone who cares about the business, not just an extra set of hands. Like you're not an order taker, which is one of the things, we talk about a lot. Yeah, and I've had calls where I've asked a lot of these questions, and they don't know a lot of the answers. And that there's value even in that. Like you just said, Kim, there's value even in that, because they start to get a sense of confidence in that you're going to lead them, down this path. It's like, any for example, I worked with a marketing coach over the last year, and I didn't, he asked me all kinds of questions, and it's like, I don't know the answer to any of this stuff, about like my, ideal client and all this stuff. But it established credibility in my eyes, because I'm like, oh, he knows the questions I should be asking, and there's value even just in that. What other questions about this part of the process or thoughts? Just looking at a few of them.
So my thought is these questions are all amazing. There's a lot of questions here.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I've never done this type of call, so I don't know exactly what I would expect, but I don't feel like I would have time to go through all of these questions. I know that there's some repeated, but just trying to figure out how to prioritize. And then if you don't get through all of the questions that you really need, like how to set expectations that you're going to like follow up with more questions or something like that?
Oh, that's such a great question, Sarah. Who has thoughts about that? How do you prioritize questions? If there are certain questions you would prioritize, feel free to, somebody's put a heart on one. I don't even know how you do that. Feel free to do that if you want. But yeah, just what are folks' thoughts about that?
Well, I think every consultant has to figure out what works best for these. I mean, for them, some of these
Mhm.
questions could be combined. They may be asking for the same thing, so this is an exhaustive list. Um, and then some of these you may not want to ask. Like for instance, I'm not going to ask how many rounds of revisions, because
Mhm.
to be kind of straightforward, you gonna get what I give you. I give 2 rounds and that's it.
Yeah,
But if somebody, let's just say somebody says, I want 17, you absolutely can have 17 and you gonna pay for it.
that's right.
So I could, that is something I've kind of established two kind of works. I've seen clients like at one time, I think when I was real new, I did 3. And I started to notice about a third round, they didn't really have anything. It was kind of a waste of time. So I was like,
Mm.
2 seemed, by the second time, we're getting fewer revisions and questions and that type of thing. So 2 seems to be the magic number. But as you go, it's one of those things that as you go, there are some of these you'll figure out, some of these you may not care. Like it wasn't an ID freelancer, but I had another freelancer that says, don't ask them their budget. Your price is your price. That may or may not work for our field because they were in another field. So
Mhm.
some of this is figuring out what works for you in your business. You may have guidelines set where you're not going to flex on that, so you don't need to ask that question. And then some of them, like I said, you can combine, and some of them are more important for you. I notice a lot of people don't ask the LMS question at
Mhm.
all because they get to the end and then the client says, okay, you made this course, great. How do I get it out to people? And they tell them, you need an LMS. And the client says, what's an LMS?
Yeah.
And the ID never thought about it. And usually that works out well for me because then they come to me and say, well, Kim, can you help my client with an LMS? So some people don't care about it because they tell them the client you're on your own. Some of them may hand them off to someone like me that'll help. It just depends on your business. So I think as you um mature more in your consultancy, you'll see which ones work for you. Because I don't think you can ask all of these in a short time frame.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's a good point. I think, what I'm doing when I'm in one of these calls is I am trying to get enough information to be able to provide a statement of work that I would feel confident in, and then and it's really kind of what is the bare minimum that I would need to ask, and that is always going to be things like, what kind of documentation do you already have? Because I want to know, am I doing a bunch of SME meetings, or am I, looking at, what they've got? And if they have something, I want them to go ahead and send it over because I want to see like what level it's at. And then, the other big things that I'm going to be looking at are, you know, what metric are we trying to change? Like what is the North Star here, so that I can, incorporate that into my statement of work? Like, why are we even doing this? Um, just seeing what else. Yeah, because a
Thank
lot of
you.
these, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I just want to thank you both for that feedback. And Kim, I think one thing that you said that, really stuck out, or I guess I'm summarizing what you said a little bit, is it sounds like it's just as strategic as what you ask as what you don't ask.
I mean, I think that I would agree with that because if you come in and you ask them all these questions, now they're going to be overwhelmed, and it's like that doesn't put you in the leverage that you want to, the position that you want to be in. It's like I hired a moving service just recently. I'm moving twice this month, and I talk to a lot of moving services, and one of them asked me this many questions and I felt overwhelmed and I wasn't even sure about some of the answers. And it was like, it went on and on and on. I called another moving service and they asked me like 3 of these questions. And it was like they got right to the heart of the matter, like exactly what it is that is going on. And it was so simple. It felt so easy. It just was a totally different experience. And then, in a follow-up email, they're like, here are some things to keep in mind for moving day. And it was just, so I think that when people feel overwhelmed, it's a little bit harder for them to want to go with you because it feels kind of messy. So I do think it's important to know what to ask and what not to ask, I would say. What other questions or thoughts, or maybe questions that, now that we've got a list of questions here, maybe just questions that you would prioritize in that first call?
I would
Yeah,
suggest maybe,
yeah.
sorry,
No, good. Go ahead.
maybe instead of asking all these questions in the first call itself, as you said, it went overwhelm them. So what I generally do is I share a query document, initial query document, before the first call, so that one, they know what kind of questions I'm going to be asking and they come prepared. Because otherwise they might say that I'll come back to you later, I'll get this information later, and that later is pretty later by the time I create proposals. So I often send them an initial document. So sometimes they populate their responses and I already know answers to some of the questions. And then I can elaborate on the rest of the questions that are really important in the call.
I think that's a really good point that you bring up, Mugda, is sending the questions ahead of time so that it relieves a little bit of that like unknown. We're not really sure what we're going to be talking about in this call, even if they haven't answered any of the questions. At least they're aware of the conversation that's going to happen. I love that. And Brianna's asking is if anyone has asked potential clients to complete an initial form that asks some of these key questions up front to avoid bombarding them. And that's kind of, what we just mentioned, I think would be one example. And I know some folks have, basically, if you contact them on their website, they've kind of got like a vetting survey thing to make sure that they're the right fit right out of the gate. So there's not even a conversation that's going to happen unless, based on that survey, they're a right fit. So I think there's a few different ways you can do that one. What other thoughts are coming up as we're looking at all these questions and thinking about how, yeah, a couple of qualifying questions. Yeah, including one about budget before they schedule a call. Yeah. Thanks, Christy. I remember you having that. Yeah, and I would say, I think, again, the thing here is to remember the North Star. The North Star for the first thing is to be able to properly scope this so you can create a statement of work. So if back to Sarah's question, how do you prioritize some of these? If I'm looking at a question and it is not going to help me scope the work, then I'm not going to be asking it. It's going to come after the, later down the road. The other thing, I think that might be, good to chat about is like, let's say, that we have the conversation and we, get answered the main questions, that we have, what the process looks like when we start actually, providing an estimate. So now we're going to write the statement of work and we're trying to figure out like, all right, what's this going to cost? So I think maybe let's transition to a conversation about that. I had thought it might be nice for us to, get into groups and we could like come up with the numbers, but I think actually the conversation is actually more, to me, I think it seems like it might be more beneficial. So I think a couple of thoughts that I have, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, number one, providing different levels of options is one option. Like, so for example, when I did this at Chipotle, my budget was unlimited. I could do anything I wanted. And so, we did video shoots, and we did, like when you're like, I had it where you're literally ringing up on the point of sale system, and you see a burrito come across. So we literally had like, imagery where the burrito's coming across, it's marked a certain way. And then you are ringing it up like software simulation, point of sale system. Now there's someone that's coming up to the register, you see them. So, I mean, it was pretty immersive. And if I were creating that for a client, I probably would do, 3 tiers. So, I might do a tier that is, like we use video. It's like incredibly immersive. It's, kind of like that level 3, probably some gamification going on, that kind of thing. And then the second level, I might use, like still images instead of video. Like it's still effective learning, but, it doesn't have all of the bells and whistles. And so those are like 2 of the options that I can think of just right off the top of my head that I might do. And maybe, another version where it doesn't have the gamification, and it's just, it's still good learning, but like, you're losing some of the elements of it, because each of those obviously are going to take more time. It doesn't mean that the learner seat time is going to be increased, but what it means is like the production level is going to increase. So I think that's, one thing to consider when I'm crafting this and estimating, a statement of work cost. So what else, what other things, what does your process look like when you go from, all right, I've got my questions answered, to next step, I'm going to create my statement of work? Any suggestions there? Or questions?
So if this was me at this point with this many questions, and as we've established, we can't probably get all of these questions answered in the 1-hour discovery call.
Mm-hmm.
And you probably do need more of these answered really to get the scoping. The reality is that I probably would pitch a road mapping to get more details and scope this, because like those learning objectives, that's 3 significant things.
Mm-hmm.
This is too big to scope based on a 1-hour call.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would actually pitch a, $2,000 or $2,500, actually for the scope of this, probably $2,500 like road mapping initial thing, and narrow down what's going to happen in, like, why aren't the sales ringing up correctly? What is it that like makes it the coupons like that people aren't applying them? Is that a system problem or is that a training problem? Which again, they cannot necessarily answer in that 1-hour call. And there may be the answer really in real life is, of course, some of it's the system and some of it's the training and skills, right? Because it's not clear cut.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't probably scope the whole project from this, unless when in my initial thing, if they'd already said that like their target budget is some super large number where I could do it and add a massive amount of padding,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that I would have to figure out the project later.
Yes.
But I would start with something smaller. I wouldn't try to scope the whole thing.
Yeah. And I think that brings up a really good point. And I also think that like, even with smaller projects than this one of the things that I've done too is like, I'll scope it like step by step. Like I'll say, here is a statement of work for the design document part. And so I will come up, we'll have several meetings, and, I include that in. And so now I've got a project-based price for the design document, which is kind of like, a smaller version of like a road mapping session if it's a smaller project. Or if I feel like things are just really messy and I just can't like get my hands around it, like, is this going to be like how much content is this even? I don't know. So then I can at least have something where I'm safeguarded and they're safeguarded, especially if I've never worked with them before. Because I've worked with people up to the design document phase and then been like, all right, and then off you fly, little bird, because I didn't really gel with you. I say it's a little bit, sometimes I literally tell them, I'm like, this is a little bit like dating. Let's just go on like a first date here and like do a design document together, see how that one goes. Yeah. What other thoughts?
So Sarah asked if somebody pushes back on a roadmap, would I walk? I guess it depends on how the conversation was going. If the conversation seemed like, you know, that they're interested, that they'd potentially be a good client to work with, and I'm really looking for the work, then I probably would come back with some more questions. I have had I know I had one where they pushed back on some of that, of the like, well, we don't want to just pay to get the proposal, which admittedly is part of what a road mapping is. And so there was one small piece of it that I was positive that we were going to need to do, that we needed to do a job aid for one part of it, that it was clear in the conversation that like they needed a checklist to do this one piece of it. And so I made it a like $3,000 package instead, that included me making the job aid for the one piece of it that even without doing road mapping, I was confident they needed. So I increased the value of it, so they had one clear, tangible thing that they could use right away. And then did sell them on that. I will say that the other thing I guess would be like, most of the time clients will see let's do a small project first to reduce the risk on both sides, and that reduces your risk to make sure that you like working with me. Most clients will buy into that.
Mm-hmm.
And so as long as you are framing it as, look, this reduces your risk too,
Mm-hmm.
and you'll get a concrete set of steps, and you don't, once the roadmap doesn't obligate you to keep working with me, you can take that plan and the recommendations and go work with somebody else, like Patty talked about.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, maybe, I guess if they really and truly didn't want to do the roadmap and they did want to do some other piece of, you know, they wanted to do some other piece of things, if there was some smaller piece of it that I did feel confident about scoping, then I would probably scope a smaller project first and do that one, and then say, we'll do this one, and then we'll do others later. Because again, I'm hedging my bets, because
Yeah.
I don't want to commit myself to working with somebody for 9 months based on a 1-hour call.
Yes.
Well, and one thing I'll say is if they're balking at the $2,000, I've done this once and it worked. So it's only popped up once though. So I'm at 100% success rate on this tactic. But essentially I say, well, hey, listen, I know that's a lot and we're not even like actually getting the project rolling yet. But what if we rolled this into the final project later and we just consider this $2,000 part of the total if you decide to go with me? And like Christy said, if they decide not to go with me, then at least they have a roadmap of concrete steps. But I make it as if like they're going to get the 2,000 discount. I'm going to consider that part of the design thing because that's what I'd have to do anyway. Like if I do end up taking the project on, the roadmap is going to be part of my design or scoping process, which is time that I would charge for regardless. So roll it in to the statement of work and then show like they've already paid it or, whatever. And it's a wash. They're still paying me the $2,000, but they feel a lot better about it. So
Yep, 100%. Thanks, Trisha. I mean, Tristan, that's a good one. A couple, so let's look at these questions and see if there are any that you feel like are missing. And I'll give you a couple that I think are missing. It's funny because once you get burned on something, then you really know it. And so one of the things that I don't see, but it might be on here, I just don't see it, is what accessibility constraints do we need to work within? Because I had this was several years ago when closed captioning was like much more of a bitch than it is now. And I always put the caption, like the text, as notes, and like, so when you're on a slide, but they wanted it to be synced with the audio, and I did not include that in the scope, and that was no fun for any of us involved. So yeah, I think accessibility is one. And then another one is translations. Do we want this to be translated? And that's important to know. Even if someone else is going to do the translations, it's important to know, because now you've got to make design considerations when you are developing it. You're not going to be able to, put an image in with text in there. Like, you're just going to have, there's just different design considerations for that. Any other questions that you feel like are missing, or thoughts?
I'm not sure if this is covered or not, but I would like to know how much time learners can dedicate to training per week, because that would depend on how extensive it needs to be. Or should it be just small little trainings here and there throughout the week, or a 1 hour training, something like that. So that would
Yeah.
help us arrive at the proper solutions. And also
Yeah.
their familiarity with the technology or the digital medium, in case we decide to go with the digital solutions.
I think that's a really good point, because when you think about a restaurant like this, this is scoped for basically a fast casual restaurant. None of them are going to be able to sit for an hour. You're going to be lucky for like a 10-minute installment. And another consideration that I saw about the technology is that one of the real life scenarios at Chipotle was that the back of house computers were notoriously slow. The internet bandwidth was not great. And so when you're putting videos on there, we had an issue where, like, the video, it needed to be preloaded, otherwise it would just like stall. And so, like, even all that stuff, like, you've got to, then we had to use like a third party, a third party tool that would preload videos. I mean, and that takes more time. So yeah, that's a really good one to bring up. What other questions or thoughts? We'll open it up to general questions and thoughts. Sarah, yeah.
I'm curious, like, let's say hypothetically that this project was brought to you without those 3 objectives, maybe it was just one. So you thought, okay, you didn't feel like you needed to go the roadmap way. You were like, okay, I could make a proposal. I'm curious, in this initial call, how much of the time is spent on setting expectations for them of what happens next? Like, what the proposal will be, because I could see people who haven't worked with someone expecting like a full storyboard from that one
Mhm.
conversation, as opposed to like, an outline. And like, then what happens after that?
Good question. Yeah. What, who wants to share kind of what it looks like, what it would look like for you, the next steps here?
I do that at the end of the call. I don't think it's anything really complicated you have to do. I don't think, to me, any client would expect a storyboard because that's expecting work. And all we did is have a meeting to get a quote. So if I meet with a, mechanic and tell him I'm having issues with my car, I don't expect him to do anything or buy anything for my car until I give him some money. So they won't get a storyboard or anything out of me until they get money. And I've had to be careful with that, especially and I know I do ID work and LMS work. I've had to be careful with that on the LMS side because some people almost want to turn a consulting call into oh, can you tell me which LMS, is the best one to pick? Well, no, now you're asking me to actually do work and give you one specific to your situation. So what I do is at the end, I just simply say, here are our next steps. I'll send you a proposal. You have X amount of time to review it. If you agree to it, you pay 25% deposit or 50% deposit, and then we'll begin the process or whatever. So I give them next steps, but I try to make it brief enough because I don't want to give them a long series of steps.
Yep. Love that. Any other ways that folks handle, and I think it is important to, like give them the, the breakdown of like, here's the next, here's the next step. The next step is you're going to get a statement of, work for me, or a contract, whatever it might be. And then of course, you would in another situation, like once they've agreed to it, okay, let's kick off. I mean, that typically in that statement of work, I always include, there's a design document, there's a storyboard, there's the developed course, you get 2 rounds of each, so you're outlining what the deliverables are, you're outlining how many rounds of reviews, that they're going to get. And so you're getting into some of those details. So when they're reviewing that statement of work, they understand, like, and pretty much a lot of clients that I work with, I mean, they want, storyboard draft 1, draft 2, like they want to keep all of those files so that they have them for the the future. So it's really good to lay out specifically what are the deliverables and what do those deliverables contain, in the statement of work.
Well,
And then of
kind of
course,
along,
yeah,
oh,
go ahead.
I was gonna say, alongside what Kim said, I try to keep things as simple as possible because I also don't want to talk myself into giving away things that I'm not going to include on the scope or in my process. My statement of work is very deliberate, it is very detailed, and they have plenty of time to review that in text form, and they either agree to it or they don't. But in a conversation, you don't want to, because you're trying to be nice or congenial or whatever, say something and be like, oh yeah, that shouldn't be a problem, and then realize that that's something that you're going to have to scope for or add more money on than you would initially kind of chatted about. So I try to keep it as simple as possible, lay out what my next steps are. When you receive this is how long this statement of work is good for. And this is how long I have availability as well. Like, that's another important thing that I don't think we've talked about, is that, like, once I provide this for you, this price is good for 30 days, as is my time. If I haven't heard back from you about a plan or how we're going to move forward in 30 days, we don't have to start in 30 days, but we need to have something in place for further communication. It's no longer any good. It's not valid anymore.
Mm-hmm.
That part, Tristan. And I've added that, and I've also added something along the lines of pricing may change. Because yesterday's price ain't today's price. Because you can have a client and they may look at your price and say, golly, this is expensive. And they may just stop communicating. And then they'll pop back up. It's almost like Patty said, dating. they'll ghost you. And you just won't hear anything and you'll be checking in and they'll be quiet. And then 10 months later, hey, boo, let's get together. No, these prices then went up because storyline went up, my time then went up, my expertise went up. So that proposal, I'll be happy to draft you a new proposal with updated price.
Yeah, 100%. And supply and demand, right? Like if somebody reaches out to me in the fall of the year when everybody else is like right before, they're trying to use all their money, my prices go up. Like, I mean, it's because I don't need the work. I mean, I got all these other things, by now. But, catch me in a slower time, maybe we can talk it about, but, maybe we can work something out. So I think that, that's the other thing is, and I also include some verbiage in my statement of work, and I can't remember exactly how it is, but basically the intent is if we start working on this together and you don't stick to the timeline, that can cause a long delay. Like, so it's like, it's not a one-to-one thing. If you're like 5 days late giving me something back, it depends on my schedule at that point. So I think that's really important because I've had a lot of, this is another ask me how I know, like I've been down the rabbit hole where they're like, oh, well, I was only 2 days late. And it's like, yeah, but now I'm like in, like full storyboard mode on another project, unfortunately. And bandwidth is a thing.
One of the other things I recommend, which Patty was a big help with this, I had a situation a couple of weeks ago that was not like a traditional Rise or storyline project. It was helping out with a bunch of videos, editing a bunch of videos, and then looking into some LMS stuff for these online influencers. And so I got on the phone with Patty and she asked me a bunch of questions. Did you think about this? Did you think about that? Did you think about this? Did you think about that? And I was able to put that into the pricing and give them a bunch of options. I can do the really tiny thing that you asked for, or here's the other things that I can supply you with. Right. So it just gave a bunch of options and helped me to put my thoughts together. And I do recommend doing that when you have, especially like, Christy has her way of doing it for projects that are like projects she's done before. But sometimes you get these things that you can do, but they're not like it's the thing that's not like the other. What was the old street thing? And how do you make sure that you're not giving away time and money for something like that? So always pass it by someone if you're not sure, I think is the thing I learned from that. So thank you, Patty Bryant.
You're very welcome. Yeah, I mean, and you can, you could post it in Slack if you have certain questions, for folks like, does anybody see that am I missing anything? And I feel like sometimes we get in our own head and we devalue what we offer, right? Like, so, in this case with Bridget, it's like, oh, it's like just a few little video scripts. I mean, it's not that big of a deal, but it's like, okay, but there are all these things to consider that are incorporated in that, and I don't even remember because I've slept since then what all the things were, but it's not just like little video scripts, it's like
okay, I didn't get the job, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, but I feel like it's sometimes we're our own, we need a little bit of an outside perspective. I think we all do that. Yeah.
Well, and to that point, I think every pricing I've ever done, I've added padding. Like you always add padding just in case unforeseen things pop up. My confidence level and the amount of padding I add move with each other. So the more confident I am with something, the less padding I'm going to add on to it.
Right.
Because if this is straightforward and just like a bunch of other things I've done, or it's a repeat client that, I'm just cranking these things out whenever they come around, the padding on there is a little bit less. I'm still going to see how much I can get away with price wise. Like, Patty talks about devaluing ourselves. I'm the Delulu one in this group where I just give them a really crazy number and see what
Yeah.
they say first.
I love that. We all need to be more like Tristan.
I have rarely had someone tell me no. Like, it's wild. But my amount of padding will go up if I'm less confident in the project or how I'm going to approach it or what kinds of things could go wrong. Because for me, it's like if it's an old hat, it's something I do all the time. I know what the pitfalls are. I know what's going to happen if things do go sideways, right? If
Yep,
there's something I'm not as familiar with, it's hard for me to imagine what could go wrong. So my amount of padding increases.
100%. Yeah, that's a really good way to do it. Thanks, Tristan. If we need a pep talk, we should always come to Tristan and be like, we're thinking about charging less, and she could be like, padding. What are you doing? I love that. Bracelets. What would Tristan do? Bracelet. Oh. All right. Well, we have another minute or so before we gotta hop off here. Does anybody have any other, questions around this topic or just thoughts they want to share about it before we conclude this one? Of course, this is not the last time we'll be talking about this, but just for today. Proudly Delulu. All right.
It's a very interesting suggestion from a person. I read it somewhere online. She suggested that sometimes when you feel that the client may hold back on the budgets and the project may not go into your kitty, in that case, provide options like Bridget said just now. Provide options for 2 or 3 learning solutions, and the one that you want to go ahead with, which is the most effective one, put that somewhere in the middle. So that clients see that that is the most effective one or the most value added one. Rather than going with the topmost one or the lowest one, they prefer the middle. That was an interesting suggestion I got from someone.
Yeah, and that's really, I'm glad you actually circled back to that because I'm going back through my marketing program right now, and one of the things that and you probably have run into this, but I'm trying to look at it in my book to see if 3 options. People are 84% more likely to choose when you do those 3 options, they're 84% likely to choose one of those. So there's like psychology back in that. And so that's why we do 3s instead of 2s when possible, because that's just like a psychology based. Yeah. Anchoring. Yeah. Thanks, Will. That's the word I was looking for. Awesome. All right. Well, we're going to have to conclude here, but fabulous conversation. I'll get this video up and then also the whiteboard that we've created. We meet on the first Thursday and third Friday of each month. So this month we'll be meeting on Friday, April 18th. And on that meeting, we're also doing a special meeting where Bridget and Danny are going to be walking through facilitation and learning about like who in here are facilitating and all kinds of good stuff. So information about that one will be coming out soon. That's the next time we meet. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. Bridget, did you have something?
Nope.
Okay.
See you next.
Yep. See you next time. Have a great rest of the day, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Hi, everyone.